Welcome and thank you for joining. My name is Maria Pelch. I'm a senior manager at Concordium. And today I am joined by Kåre Kjeldstrøm, who's the CTO and CPO at Concordium, and Michael Munk, founder and CEO of 2021 AI. We will be discussing two of the hottest technologies of the moment, namely AI and blockchain, and how these two technologies can amplify each other in creating a safer and more trusted digital world. At the end of this conversation, we'll make some time for some questions. So if you have any questions at all, feel free to send them in on the chat, which you're watching this on, and we'll make sure to collect them all. Before we get started, I think, on the conversation, let's just level the playing field for a bit. And Michael, perhaps you will start with an introduction to what 2021 AI is.
Oh, certainly, and thank you so much for inviting us today to announce this new partnership. We're super excited about this. 2021 AI is a AI technology company. So that's really where we started some 6 years back. So investing heavily in building an AI platform where you can actually develop, deploy, and use AI was to amplify our mission, which is really to put AI, machine learning, and these new advanced technologies in the hands of more companies, for them to produce great models for business, predictions, humanitarian purposes, and so on and so forth. But what we soon realized was that there would be an even bigger challenge for many of these organizations actually to utilize this technology in its full. And the challenge is really on the governance, risk compliance, legislation, ethical guidelines, best practices surrounding these new technologies. We started working with the EU some 4 years back on what was labeled at that point in time the ethical guidelines for trustworthy AI, and now has matured into the EU AI Act. We realized that, well, if the companies only had to comply with that, that would be a big challenge, because you could not use the old sort of pen and paper, tick the boxes technology would not work. These are very dynamic technologies, and you would need to have a digital platform to support this. We also realized that EU would not be the only authority, would not be the only one issuing guidelines. This would happen all around the world. So basically that's what we're doing. We are supporting organizations around the world, these being authorities, these being companies that are front runners in this field. And I think if you had asked me some 6 months back, if I had we had overinvested a bit in our technology stack, we were said maybe because the world is not really absorbing what we're doing. But that has changed. So the last 6 months, 12 months, we've seen a new phenomenon in AI, ChatGPT, large language models, which really has put in perspective for most people that you need governance, that you need guardrails, that you need to monitor how you use these new technologies.
Thank you for that, Michael. I think you hit that on the nail with probably why a lot of us are here, right? We've heard about AI for quite a bit. It cooled down and now it's coming back full frontal. And I think one of the other technologies that's been there for a while is blockchain technology as well. Kåre, we're going to wait a bit to hear your beautiful voice. And I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Holger Fischer, who's a blockchain analyst at Concordium. And he'll give us an introduction to some of the key differentiators of Concordium blockchain.
My name is Holger Fischer, and I work as a blockchain solutions analyst at Concordium. My day-to-day work goes with helping organizations implement blockchain technology and helping more Web3-based projects to integrate to the Concordium blockchain. Now, Concordium blockchain is a layer 1 blockchain, which means that it provides the underlying infrastructure for decentralized applications to be built upon. Now, there's a lot of layer 1 blockchains in this industry, and Concordium have key main differentiators that set itself apart from its peers. The first one is that it has stable transaction fees, which means that when you transact on a Concordium blockchain, you can rely on the transaction fee being stable and the same. Now, this is very important if you are in organizations that need to be able to budget ahead. A second key main differentiator is the identity layer at the protocol level. If you want to become a network participant or build on top of Concordium, transact or interact in any way, you actually need to be identified before you can do that. Now, because of these key main differentiators, a lot of organizations and projects have chosen to build their solutions on top of Concordium. And as such, Concordium strives and feels responsible in perfecting the blockchain trilemma, which is decentralization, security, and scalability. But at Concordium, there's also a fourth component, which is very much important, and that is regulation and being regulation ready. Now, because of the ID layer, there is the accountability aspect. So if any illicit activity happens on chain, this can actually be upheld. Now, this all goes or points more toward the overall mission of Concordium, which is in creating a safer digital world by empowering individuals and organizations to harness the potential of blockchain.
So we really have to do with two companies that are in quite disruptive industries, but again have chosen a very to embed safety and responsibility into their DNA. I think Core, probably in a blockchain space that is synonymous with being anonymous and being autonomous. How does safety actually play into this space?
It's a good question. Safety is sort of at the core of Concordium. It's the DNA that we have. And when you look at blockchain and AI, the safety aspect comes into play in terms of the authenticity of the large language models that you're looking at. So what you can do is you typically not store the large language models on the blockchain itself because there's simply too much data. But what you can do is you can fingerprint them. So basically what you generate is a fingerprint of the LLM, and you write that on the blockchain. And because the blockchain is an immutable place, it can never be deleted. And then in the future, when you get an LLM, you can go and check that it was actually that LLM. Problem with that, of course, is still the identification of who did it back in the day, right? On Concordium, we have the identity layer that Holger was talking to, and that gives that added layer of trust and security and safety. Because now you can not only see that the data has not been tampered with, the integrity is still there, but also who actually created it. So that's one aspect. Another aspect, of course, where blockchain and AI comes into play is the whole thing about proof of humanity, but I think we can talk more about that later.
I think we'll absolutely have time for that. Thank you. So I think very valid points as well, and already getting a bit into what is actually so unique in the marriage between AI and blockchain. There is something about regulations though, and I think both industries we've seen has been thriving or trying to get into the space of regulations and actually pushing regulatory instances closer to the companies so we actually know how to navigate. Before we move in further into the dialogue, we're just going to go quickly and hear from one of the strategic advisors to Concordium, Michael Jackson. He's been on the forefront of these two technologies for multiple years, have a 10-year tenure in the crypto space, and is actually today at the Cannes Film Festival for the CogX AI discussions to discuss how we actually manage these new technologies.
I've been in technology many, many years, and I've always been interested in the social aspects of technology, how technology affects everyday lives, and how we can use regulation to protect individuals from the power of technology. But one of the big problems with AI is it's a black box where you've got data coming into it, there are decisions coming out of it, and you don't know what's happening in the middle. You need to verify the authenticity of the data that's going into it to train the model. You're going to have to verify the model itself, and you're going to have to check the authenticity of the data that's coming out of the model today. And all of those three things are really, really difficult to do. And as with any revolutionary technology, there'll be regulation applied to it. The EU today are working on new rules around AI, around how you can regulate the models of AI, how you can verify the input, make sure it's authentic, the input coming into the models, that the output is doing the right thing. And these models have been created today. There's panels and panels of people working in Brussels on this today. You can influence it. but you have to consider it. You have to be aware of it as you design your new products using AI.
So I believe Michael here is trying to come across with two very important points. One of them is obviously regulations. Another one is the fact that AI can be a black box. I think inherently blockchain technology is different in the fact that it's transparent and it's traceable. But perhaps, Cole, if you can elaborate on the introduction that you just gave, what is it that we see in the synergies between blockchain technology and AI now?
Yeah, so like Michael was pointing out, what you need to understand is that in some instances you will have to trust an LLM, meaning you'll have to trust whoever trained that LLM. Dog, right? You buy this dog that you will be using for hunting, and then you don't know who trained it. You don't even know if it's good for hunting. Of course, you'll find out in the long run, but also you don't know if it's biased, right? Does it want to go for a hare or for a rabbit? That would be kind of interesting to know up front. So I see a space that's developing towards a world where you can know where stuff comes from, the LLM models, who trained them, and where in those will be certified LLM models for things, right? Now, wouldn't it be lovely if you could also go and verify that that LLM model that you bought from someone that was supposed to be certified has not been changed? That's one of the things you can do with blockchain, and you can also see sort of the history of who owned it if you choose to write that on the blockchain. So you get the transparency, you also get the provenance and the authentication. And then of course there's the other thing which is really the proof of humanity, which is something we've touched on in Concordium. You just released a very interesting product that we'll be talking about in a minute, I think, which is about when you interact with these models and the deep fakes and all these things, do you know that it's a human or a robot or a machine? With something like zero knowledge proof technology and the ID that we have in Concordium, we're actually able to address this. Now you can prove your ID.
We'll use it as a cliffhanger and stay a bit in the space of the two first things that you mentioned, which is really about, how do we actually ensure that we know the data that has gone into the AI models that we're training, but also how do we ensure that they haven't been tampered with? And I think, Michael, with the EU legislation that you also commented on just before, a lot of your clients have been looking to this, and I know that you've also had some solutioning done on the topic of the marriage between AI and blockchain. Could you put some words around, what does this tool actually empower your clients to do?
Yes, so if we look at it at a very broad level, really the ability to look at any digital technology, that being a AI model, machine learning model, whatever this is, that needs to be validated, verified on certain parameters. So one could be that the data set has not been tampered with, that the model are trained on. That could be one example, as Michael mentioned and Cole mentioned. Another example could be how we ensure that we, again, don't use pen and paper. So if I have this question about were you dog trained on hunting one or the other, yes, no. No, actually, I would like to have a proof that certain things did take place. In this case, would I like to validate that there's no bias in my data set? Then I might run an algorithm checking for that. And then I get a stamp, a proof that there is no bias in this data set. Or even if there is bias, then I run a bias mitigation algorithm and get a new stamp saying, now I ran this and now I'm okay. So that's really the whole infrastructure around how the marriage between what we're doing on the governance side in our governance platform can be used to validate and prove that certain things has taken place. And then when we collect all of these stamps, then over time we'll ensure that more and more questions, for example, in the EU AI Act, has been answered and digitally saved now, right? So in the end, I can certify that my company, that my AI model complies to a certain regulation or guideline.
Very interesting and very much on the forefront of something that is coming, I think, in 2024, but I think a lot of companies are actually looking into now. We're fortunate enough to have a video explaining this specific asset from your CTO, Rasmus, who will just quickly take us through what does an asset that is using both blockchain and AI actually looks like, and he'll also give a use case to explain it at the end.
Enabling the users to store the AI digital trace or AI audit log on a Concordium blockchain enables you to ensure validity and integrity of the data. It also ensures that stakeholders can receive a copy of the digital trace or an AI audit log and uniquely be able to validate its authenticity. With this initiative, we introduce a way for AI auditors and AI companies to exchange AI transparency information and ensure that this information is valid, tamper-proof, and ultimately the proof that the AI model in question does in fact live up to the regulatory environments. Companies are increasingly expected to engage in ESG reporting due to several reasons. It is possible today to embed the blockchain technology into ESG reports, making the data immutable and able to verify the authenticity of the data. So how does it work? Well, you choose the ESG report that you want to upload, and then you digitally sign it. So the signing itself is where you are computing the data and computing the share. It will be added to the Concordium smart contract. And then finally, a message is received that confirms that the data is entered into the Concordium blockchain. And then after that is done, you can uniquely validate the ESG data as belonging to that stakeholder by validating it using the confirmation icon.
So this concept of doing e-sealing specifically on AI models is quite impressive. I think, Michael, it would be fun to dive a bit into, now we had the ESG example, but what other industries are you seeing that this capability could actually make sense for?
I think this really goes across industries. So any industry that are actually relying on data, that data are valid, certified in a certain way. A couple of examples that we work with is certainly within the healthcare industry. We've seen that from clients, hospitals, and others we work with in Denmark, how important this is, because these data sets might be used to train models that might be used to treat humans, and human life might be at stake at some point. But in general, it goes all the way across any industry where I believe soon will see that there will be some kind of regulation, some kind of best practice on which data you are allowed to use in certain use cases, as we talk about. So today, it's certainly the more regulated industries, the industries that are finance, healthcare, life science, public sector. But going forward, this will go across any sector, as I see it today.
All right. Let's see if we can dive a bit more into this little intersection of the two technologies. For me personally, what I've seen from the last few months as well is this explosion of synthetic media. Any content that you don't know who it has been created by, if it's fake or if it's actual news. The same with deepfakes. I think this topic is really one where you see the potentness of both of the technologies, but perhaps you can dial us a bit into, what is it that we're actually seeing between these two technologies when it comes to synthetic media?
Synthetic media is sort of an up-and-coming thing, right? It's only going to get worse. I think the explosion of ChatGPT and sort of the whole proliferation of AI that's coming out there right now has sort of shown the world that a lot of things are possible, right? Every new day there is something new coming up. You see chat robots mimicking Steve Jobs. You chat with them and you get his voice back, right? Now, what if someone were to call you on your phone? You have no way to basically identify them. And it could be maybe your child or something's voice, maybe not your child, right? So I think the whole idea about being able to prove that you are a human or that you are not a human is actually a big deal. And this is something that we're capable of doing with Concordium. We just launched the MySoMe ID, which basically allows you to prove that you are who you say you are and a human. And this is your social media account. We have LinkedIn integrated as the first thing, but obviously more things can come like Twitter, Instagram, all of these Google accounts, right? You can prove that you have the ownership of these and that you are indeed who you say you are human. The other thing might also be interesting to prove that you're actually not human, but you're actually a robot acting on behalf of a human. And who is that human, and that a human can empower the robot to do things. All of that is capable again, possible again with Concordium's ID infrastructure and the zero knowledge proofs that we have. We have a proof of concept for a Telegram robot that would actually, you can integrate with and interact with, which does things like that, where you can basically have it as a moderator in a group. And if you're not human, you'd be asked to prove that you're human. If you don't want to prove it, you cannot be in the group, right? So, I mean, you can have these kind of things where you can guard yourself from spam robots, but obviously it's going to be an arms race, right? And so there will also be, this will be countered by other things, and then we'll have to come up with more.
It's because I think obviously one of the first steps would be knowing that it's a human behind, or if it isn't a human behind. But one of the things you would also see probably going forward is deep fakes that are being licensed out by companies or are being used as an active part of a marketing strategy. And I think for those, that content is just as sincere. So Michael, perhaps you can give us some insights into how you're working with these deep fakes and how they can actually also be used as a force for good and not necessarily a bad thing.
Yes, so we're not working with them in a bad way, just to set the scene for that. But we're seeing a lot of concerns around this. And again, I think really this is to my point very early on that a lot of people, for a lot of people, it becomes very, very visual. It becomes very real that we need to do something around the way we work with AI and new digital technologies. And let's not forget, this is not just AI. It's actually any digital technology that we work with that can manipulate voices, pictures, whatever this might be. So what we're seeing is also an interest from authorities. And I know that there are authorities listening in today that we speak to that are very interested in how we can, in the combination of what we have, our governance, risk and compliance platform, ensure that that could be data set, that could be pictures, that could be anything, but some digitally generated output is actually not, you can say, breaching any ethical barriers, breaching any copyrights, whatever this might be, right? So the thing is also that you will be able to set certain criteria for what do you want this digital product to comply with, right? And that's the whole idea when I talk about also, you'll have the EU AI Act, you will have ethical guidelines, you have a lot of things. So you cannot just rely on that one of these things you need to comply with.
I know that you've also done a bit of work on this specific topic too, so I think we'll head over again to see one of the assets that you've been building in 2021 AI that is actually going in and accounting for this deep fake scenario. So over to you, Rasmus, again.
The problem with synthetic generated videos and media material is primarily centered around the issue of misinformation and deception. Synthetic media refers to content that is artificially generated or manipulated using techniques like deep learning, machine learning, or other types of computer graphics. One major concern is the potential for deepfakes, which are a specific type of synthetic media that involves replacing a person's face or voice in an existing video with somebody else's. Deepfakes can be created with relatively ease and can be used to create highly realistic but completely fabricated videos, making it difficult to distinguish between real and fake content. Now, it is possible today to embed the blockchain technology into media files, making these media files immutable, and you are able to uniquely verify its authenticity of the files. So how does it work? Well, the first thing you do is that you upload the data, and then you choose the content and you do the digital signing process. You connect to the Concordium blockchain, and then you do your watermark and your share calculations, and then you add that to the smart contract.
So this is really one of the very interesting tools, I think, at least moving forward, that you know who the sender is, you're able to verify that and actually prove that. But I think, Michael, it would be interesting to understand a bit more, what does the process look like of actually doing the governance? Like, how do you line it up? How do you know when to connect to a blockchain?
Well, again, I think it really depends on the use case, right? So this is from anything, as the example Rasmus gave in the video, where you upload a synthetic generated or actual generated video as sort of a middle case, as I would label this, to data sets, as I mentioned, which seems pretty simple in the sense to validate that these are not tampered with, all the way to what we have also done here, the ability to actually have certain processes where you document certain processes in a model development process. So that being first, data set, is that corrupted, bias-free, and so on and so forth. We do one tampering. Next, when we do develop the model, do we comply with certain criteria? Finally, when we deploy it, do we have the right approvals? Certainly, going all the way to the use of this, is my organization ready? Have we done da. And at each point in time, we can automatically put a stamp on this and put it on a blockchain, which actually is a pretty impressive piece of work, I think, because you can automate this. So all the way from doing one-offs to automate a whole process with actually combining a lot of stamps on a blockchain.
And could you leave us with what is it exactly then a company is able to do with that information?
Well, a company is certainly capable initially just to share with the world around them that they've done this in accordance with certain ethical criteria, in accordance with the things that we're already familiar with, the GDPR, and in the end, maybe the EU, not maybe, but the EU AI Act, and over time, even more complicated regulations to comply with. So you can share that with the outside world, or you can share it with your authorities. Your authorities can also then, demand that you deliver that information to them before they can approve the model that you intend to put in production and in real use towards use cases, businesses, real people out there.
So I think that the solution that we just saw is really interesting, and it's built upon Concordium. Concordium has this ID layer that we speak quite often about, and I think it would be interesting to dial a bit into where is it that building something like this on a blockchain like Concordium actually makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so the ID layer is basically sort of at the bottom of Concordium's technology stack in a sense. It's weaved into our DNA is probably a better way to say it. It's when you open an account, like Holger was saying, you have to go through an identity verification check. We just simplified that actually. For anyone who's in Northern Europe, you can now use your MID ID or bank ID or other government ID you have electronically to create an ID. So it's like that, right? And now you have an ID. Then you can open accounts, and every time you do transactions on the blockchain, there is a pseudonym baked into sort of the transaction there, which is not your ID. We don't store the ID on the blockchain itself, but we store reference. And so what that enables us is the ability to reveal who did a transaction if need be. Concordium cannot do it, and there's no single person that can do it, but there's an infrastructure that if law enforcement comes, there is a safety net where we can reveal. So that creates sort of a platform of trust, right? It's a safety net underneath the blockchain that allows you to put stuff there. And if bad actors show up, well, there is a way for law enforcement to go and figure out what happened. And that is also true for AI. So if we start putting information from AI on the blockchain, if something goes south somewhere, there is a way to investigate, right? But more, the ID opens up for self-sovereignty, which is really where you control your own data. So instead of having silos of information sitting with Google, Facebook, and other big tech, the information that is really yours can be pulled out and broken free of these tech giants, and you can now own them yourself. And you can start proving things about them. So for instance, you can prove that you created an LLM, or that you bought this LLM, or you already currently own the LLM, and who are you, right? So I think there's a lot of intersection there about where you can go from being anonymous to being identified, and you can attach that to AI models, but also to the data that goes in and out of the AI models, or the certificates that you're granting because you verified that an AI model, for instance, was not biased, or other things that might be relevant to this work, right? So yeah, it's basically a way for others to go and check that no one has been cheating here, and it cannot be tampered with, right?
Maybe one of the beautiful things about this partnership, right, that safety and accountability is so ingrained in each of the things that the two companies pull together. I think it would be interesting perhaps to go to some of the questions from the audience already, if you guys are up for it. Good. All right. I've already collected my favorite ones. So I think we'll go ahead and start with, how do you see the intersection of AI and blockchain technologies impacting industries in the coming years? Cole?
Yeah, so I think we already touched on it, right? It's really about the ability to tell fake from real. That is definitely a big deal, right? It goes all the way from proving that people have not created a bad model or something like that, to checking whether you're dealing with a real person or a machine. So all of the use cases you can find in that space, and there are many, are relevant, right? The first place we will see this, obviously, is things like phone calls, for instance. Right now, with the ability to attach ChatGPT to something that modulates your voice with a large language model that sounds like someone else, it makes for really interesting crank calls, but also much worse scams, right? So authenticity of phone calls is going to be a thing, and I predict that ordinary phone calls will go away. I think with this, you don't know who you're dealing with, so you will have to know who's calling, right? And there has to be some technology to prove that. So proof of personhood is going to be sort of woven into all aspects of life, and this is again zero knowledge proof technology that we are building in Concordium and already have rolled out for the wallets. Is such a technology that can help with this. I think going forward, for instance, we also have what we call the Web3 ID, which is the next generation of our identity framework, where you can have any known person or company, known in terms of known on the blockchain, proving something about someone else or attributing something to someone else. So for instance, you are an employee of Concordium and you can prove that to me using zero knowledge proof technology. Right. So that also opens up for proving other things and having these seals of authenticity and other things that you can prove. Blockchain technology obviously has NFTs that can be used as like these seals of or tokens that attribute something to something. So I think the use cases are, like Michael mentioned, in the healthcare space, a lot of it, right? We have an interesting other use case that we shouldn't be diving into right now, but it's super interesting, provenance tags, where you can put these little RFID tags on medicines that's being shipped. Now we can see that it was actually created by the original supplier and it's not fake medicine. All of that on the blockchain and ID'd, right? So it's all over the place, not just AI, but all over. This whole thing about authenticity, provenance, integrity, and certainly AI as we move into a world where AI is all over the place.
Very interesting. What type of AI-based use cases could benefit from Concordium's integration into 2021 AI's platform, Grace? Michael, maybe that one is a bit more for you, and perhaps give some context to Grace.
It certainly is, and Grace as a platform. I think we touched a bit on the use cases a couple of times here. So I think we got them all the way from data to more advanced AI models. But really what I find interesting there is, again, that when you work in these development processes with AI, many times you would, as a data scientist, remember to do certain things. But what we can do here is also automate the governance process for you. So we can make sure that when you do work with your AI model, in that work, that we automatically in that process remind you, or actually take a snapshot of the data you need to make sure that you're compliant with a certain ethical guideline, law, regulation, what that might be. And that will be important because if you look at AI today, it is out there, but how much is it out there? Well, people are using 1, 2, 3 models if we look at most. But if we look at the most advanced companies, they're using thousands of models. So how can you scale that? How can you make sure that you actually, in your production and in your production process, stays compliant to regulations? That's a real challenge, and it's something certainly also debated in the EU for the moment. How do we not over-regulate? So the whole thing here is, how can we automate? How can we enhance people developing AI to be compliant and responsibly using this new technology?
It's an interesting phrase, the one with over-regulation, because I think as both companies are leaning a bit more into the regulatory being regulatory ready, I think this over-regulation and waiting for what is to come is also about ensuring everyone in the process until we get to that point, which I think the Grace tool evidently allows for. If you have any questions, please feel free to send them in on whatever chat platform you're on, and they'll be coming on to here, and I'll try to see if we can get through as many of them as possible. An interesting question around this concept about a black box or AI, that it can be a black box. How, if something goes wrong, how can we actually make sure that we hold the parties where something did went wrong or did go wrong accountable for it, and how long will it take to actually figure it out?
I can take a first stab at that one, and it is really a complicated question. And if we take it from a legislation point of view for the moment, what people are looking at is that there would be 3 responsible parties. And let's remember that. So there's the one developing the models, there's the one deploying these or taking these into production, and then there is the use of the model. Right? And this is important because we talk to clients who say, well, we will only be using this model that we bought from this and that larger company. We expect that they fix this for us. But that's not the reality. The reality is that you still need to have a governance compliance framework in place for the last 2 bits of this also. So everyone has to be aware that there are concerns, have to be aware that there are things they need to comply with. And now to the part of the question, black box and models, well, that is certainly still a challenge for many of the AI models out there. How close can you get to the actual model and what goes on? But the exercise here is to get as close as you can and build as much information around that until we can get, if not all, into the details of the models. Like the LLMs, ChatGPT, we are not going to get to the inner workings of that, but we can still do a lot around that. We can still ensure that the prompts we're putting in there are scanned for personal identifiable information, that there's no hate speech, bad wording, and so both in the way we use this in our company. So let's not fall for the fact that we cannot, for all models, get into the inner working of those. We can still do a lot when it comes to governance.
And I think on that topic, Kåre, it's quite interesting to dive into, again, one of the key features of Concordium, the fact that you can shield transaction, you can shield individuals. In creating something where you want to get as close to the actual inner workings of the language models that you're using, what can Concordium do in terms of getting closer to these? Is there anything in the core features of Concordium that actually makes it more possible?
In terms of getting closer to the inner workings, I would say that I think it's really comes back to what Michael was saying before, the ability to check that a certain language model lives up to certain properties, and the ability to check that someone checked it, right? And what was it that they checked? And that the model you're getting has not been tampered with since the check. So that if it's been scanned for hate speech, then the model you're getting is that version that was scanned for hate speech, not a version that was since altered to have hate speech, right? And that's what you can use the blockchain for, because now you can start, every time you have done this, you can either fingerprint the entire thing, the entire language model, or you can fingerprint maybe the data that you used as an input in order to do this, and the output that you used in order to do this. And then if someone reruns the test, they can check that the input was the same, the model was the same, the output was the same, and all of that can be read from the blockchain. And it can still be completely anonymous, because you can sort of create this trail of things that happen, right? Everything is on the blockchain, it's always there. You can always go back and read it. And then if you want to reveal something about yourself, that you are actually the current holder of that model, you can choose to do that, or you can reveal it on chain. If you're like a sort of a company certifying that something happened, you can also reveal that as you write it to the chain. So there's like different degrees of accountability that you can choose to use here. Of course, you could also say that, why don't I just write this in the database somewhere? Well, you could, but databases are not safe in the same way that a blockchain is, because it's public, it's immutable, can't be tampered with, right? So that's the whole win of all of this.
I think you had a marking there, but I think it's really interesting on the points of identity going into...
Exactly, and just to again emphasize this partnership and where we have different roles in this, right? So what Core is mentioning is fantastic in terms of validation and certification and not tampering with information, where we are sort of the more off-chain layer. We are more the interface to the user. So we would actually be aiding clients with a chatbot where we anonymize data going in. We would register all activity going in and out of ChatGPT, but we don't want to put all of it on a blockchain. We want to put some of it when we've done certain, again, validations or maybe breaches of this. So again, I think this is really where we complement each other super well.
Let's see if we can end off on some of the exciting things that are happening in the industry with some future foresights, ideas from you guys. One of the questions is, what are the potential future developments or advancements in the field of AI and blockchain that you find particularly interesting or promising?
That's a good question. I would say that as we move towards a world where AI is all over the place, we have to come up with new ways of interacting with each other, or ways that are safer, right? Like I mentioned the phone call, for instance, before, which is it's a huge problem. How do you know that it's not mom dialing but a robot, right? So I think the sort of solution to that lies in the mix between things like the Grace platform, where you can have models that have been tested, the blockchain where Grace can write all of these certifications so that you can go and verify that the models you're getting are actually verified, and then applications that now go version 2, right? Like phone call version 2, SMS version 2. We already have that in the shape of Meet and Zoom and other types of video calls, but also like phone calls. You can call from Facebook if you want to. But again, that's a centralized solution, right? You want to have decentralized solutions. We don't have anyone necessarily being able to intersect. So it's becoming tricky, and I think the whole world actually needs to move forward to counter this. That would be my. It's a broad question, but also sort of a broad answer.
It's
right?
a good broad answer, and I think summarizing it has a lot to do with how we portray ourselves on, for instance, social media. How do we prove that the person that we're actually interacting with is indeed the real person that we think they are?
But also that they are actually who they say are right now, that there's a proof of presence, for instance, right? That's also super tricky.
Yeah, we can't have me dialing into our calls as a deepfake.
Right.
Michael, I'll give you the same question. What is some of the interesting developments that you find most mind-blowing in the convergence of AI and blockchain?
Well, I think really what I find most mind-blowing for the moment is, again, what we've seen with ChatGPT. Because again, if we go back 12 months, most people, including myself, had not seen these large language models being used for what they're used for now. The use cases are tremendous. They're fantastic. They're going to change they have changed the way we engage with AI, but they're also going to change the actual implementation of AI. And now we're back again to our mission, really get AI out to as many companies, corporates, organizations out there to solve challenging, exciting, good business cases. But the only way to do so is really to ensure that the governance compliance around this is in place. Because if we don't do that, well, someone will come and stop us and say, this is illegal, or this, we will ourselves self-regulate a bit more and realize that, well, this doesn't really comply with our ethical guidelines or the way we want to act as a company. So I think the use cases, they're tremendous. There's a ton of them, but we need to have this compliance governance layer around it.
Thank you. And thank all of you for joining in today. I think there might be a few questions left, but I'll see if I can get the guys to answer them at a later point. If you want to know more, you're more than welcome to go to our websites. It's 2021.ai or concordium.com. And if there's any specific questions, you can reach out to me and the team on projects@concordium.com. But for now, thank you for joining, and thank both of you for taking the time to be here today.